Hello again, welcome back. I hope you had nice coffees and cakes and everything that you should have at this point. We're going to crack on, and this session, my name's Niall Gavin, I'm going to be your chair for this session with Donald Clark. The good news is that means I shut up and he gets on with it, and that's the way it should be. You'll be well aware of Don. He's been shaking things up in online learning, games, simulation, social media, and mobile learning for 30 years odd. Sometimes controversial, but never boring. He's much in demand as a blogger and a conference speaker. And now, like you, I'm excited to hear his views today on how algorithms and AI, artificial intelligence, are transforming the learning landscape. Just as a little add-on here, don't forget you can tweet me your questions if you like for Don during the session. Use the hashtag #T1S1, or you can use my username @NeilGavinUK. We're going to try and balance this out so that we've got about 15 minutes for questions at the end. So do feel free to tweet any questions you've got, or we'll take them from the floor as and when the time comes. So I'm going to hand over to Don now with this news just in. Don has just been made a professor at the University of Derby. Donald Clark.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. I was in the pub on Friday night with my two mates, and one of them said, "What's this professor thing, Donald? You know, what are you a professor of?" With a really skeptical note in his voice. He's a Scots guy. And I said, "I'm a professor of online pedagogy." And my other mate said, "Don't they put people in jail for that?" You know, the pub, the great leveler, really, you know. Don't get away with any shit in those places. Anyway, here I am this morning. I'm going to talk to you about AI, artificial intelligence, and I've been heavily invested on this one topic for the last 2 years. I've invested in it. I've started a company that delivers AI type learning. My son's doing a degree in AI, so my whole world has been enveloped in this thing because I think these two letters are perhaps the most important two letters in the learning world. We heard the talk this morning on hierarchy and how we have networks as principles and the hyperlink is the big driver. I'm going to invent my own word. I'm going to invent the word hierarchy, A-I-R-A-K-Y, because actually artificial intelligence blows that whole hyperlink to pieces. The whole notion that the hyperlink is a link, that's like 1970 or something, you know, that we just hyperlink between Wikipedia pages. It's much more complicated than that, as I will show you over this next half hour or so. Okay, so AI and learning. Why is this so important? Why is it so important? Well, something absolutely astounding has happened, not only for learning, but for we as a species. So about 3 or 4 years ago, we had this rise of AI in the real world through Google. All these huge tech companies buy AI companies, and almost everything you do on those devices now is delivered by some sort of AI. I don't know if you saw the Apple launch yesterday. Feature after feature after feature, all AI driven. Deep learning was the most commonly used phrase by the presenters. Google is, Twitter is, Facebook is, Netflix is, almost everything you do in those devices is driven by algorithms in one way or another. This is big news, but it's even worse than that, or better, I think, because in the universe, we had ourselves as learners. We're one of these. I've even got my prop. We have a brain. We have teachers who have one of these. And the two have a lot of time communicating with each other because this thing forgets almost everything you try and teach it. It sleeps 8 hours a day, it gets grumpy, it gets hangovers, it's an absolute nightmare. Suddenly we have a new species, not of brains, but intelligences in our universe. Machines actually have brains now. They become learners. Not only do they become learners, they are super learners. They learn far faster than any human being can learn, as DeepMind did recently when it beat the Go champion for Google. There's no human being could match that. That's happening now. Not only that, not only does it learn quickly, these things are becoming teachers. And they may ultimately be better than any human teacher. I think that's true in certain domains already. If you type something into Google, there's no teacher in the land that would be able to give you the answer that Google gives you. So we're on the verge of some really major breakthroughs here in the learning world, I think. But let me try and make that concrete for you, because you're people in real organizations with real things to tackle, and I'm going to try and make this really empirical and concrete as we go through. Now, this is a thing I've been saying for years here, but I think it's generally true that we have had this massive pedagogic shift over the last 20 years because of the internet, by and large amongst learners, not amongst teaching or L&D or in our universities and schools, but that doesn't matter because the learners are what really matter. And the big driver there has been tech. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So biggest pedagogic, I mean, I was saying this morning, there's been no real pedagogic change. There's been massive pedagogic change. Can you remember when we didn't have Google? Imagine a world without it. It's almost unimaginable. But I think actually something else is going to happen here, and that's over the next 5 years, we'll see even more change than we've had over the last 2,020 years. The next 5 years with AI are going to be absolutely astounding because it's a gear change. Okay, first of all, what is AI? Now, we've got one of those things, and you must be very careful here. Now, first of all, the problem with the brain in terms of traditional technology-based learning is that it doesn't actually like hierarchical stuff. It doesn't learn things like video. It doesn't record everything and replay it like a video. It doesn't like things in alphabetical order. And when you do a bit of e-learning, the truth of the matter is, and I made this stuff for 30 years, the truth of the matter is, it's like wearing a suit that's about 3 sizes too small. You're channeled through these little text graphic stuff. You hit a multiple choice question, more text graphics, another 5 multiple choice questions, and you're pissed off and bored within about 15 minutes. This is the reality of what we've been doing, folks. There's no sophistication in this, and the brain reacts badly to this straitjacketing. We've got to free that and get out of that paradigm. Now, there are certain things you have to know about artificial intelligence before we start. The first is what it is not. Now, we didn't learn to fly by copying the flapping of the bird's wings, right? We will not get across the Atlantic in comfort with 3 meals if the plane was flapping up and down. We invented new technology. And the same is true of AI. It's not actually about copying what we do or brains do. It's about inventing new pieces of technology that do it better. So we didn't actually go faster by looking at the legs of a cheetah, which is the fastest animal on the planet. We actually invented the wheel. So it's another piece of technology. So that's what AI is. Don't imagine for a moment that it's just about copying what teachers do or what other human brains do. It's about doing things very, very differently. And you may have seen these movies. This one's the trouble with the movies in AI is it's largely dystopian, this notion that they're all going to take out steak knives from your kitchen and murder you in your bed. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. However, there's some interesting movies I highly recommend. Chappie's interesting because there, an eternal truth about AI is that certain types of AI, machine learning in particular, supervised learning they call it, actually the AI learns how to do things, so you feed the AI with lots of data. So if you were a teacher in mathematics, you feed the AI machine with lots of teaching tips about teaching mathematics. So that film does show that. It's unfortunate Chappie actually learns a load of sort of drug slang and so on and becomes a bit of a sort of hip-hop artist. But an interesting movie. This one's interesting. I don't know if you've seen this film. I really did enjoy this. This guy falls in love with an AI, his girlfriend's online, and he finds at the end of the movie, tragically, that 1 million other guys have the same girlfriend. And it's really a test of the Turing test. And believe me, the Turing test has already been broken. If you look at Little Ice, I'll show you this later, in China, they're getting up to 500 million kids who believe that Little Ice is real and it's a bot. So the Turing test has been blown to pieces already. This has come real. The really interesting one is this one, because I had loads of AI experts on the script. If you want to look at the sophisticated arguments around AI, that's the film to watch. Okay? But don't believe everything you see in the movies. Now, this is interesting. Netflix, you may not be unaware of it, but Netflix put out a prize for $1 million. A couple of academics, young academics, wrote an algorithm, and it drives about 75% of Netflix revenue. Almost everything you watch on Netflix, even though you may be unaware of it, is driven by their algorithm. So all those subtle little things, little sliders that come up and so on. And they're constantly trying to be aware of the algorithm because it's constantly trying to drive you towards properties that they don't pay many fees on. So you will have watched House of Cards. Why? Because Netflix paid for it. They pay no fees. It will be pushing sort of a lot of quite crappy third-rate movies at you because they want you to watch them and not the really big blockbusters because they have to pay license fees out. So there's a downside to this. But Netflix do something quite interesting. After the first series of House of Cards, they used AI to do a scene analysis of the first series. They know exactly what every single Netflix viewer has seen in House of Cards when you stopped, what scene you jumped out at. Did you skip any parts of the series? They take all that data, applied an AI engine, and then that was fed to the scriptwriters for the second series of House of Cards. So AI is actually behind the art of movie writing now, or in that case, box set writing. Isn't that weird? Here's something even weirder. Over the last month or two, there were guys at Sundance who were filmmakers, fed an AI engine with loads of comic book and science fiction books and so on. They just fed this beast with loads of sci-fi stuff and allowed the engine to write a sci-fi script on its own, and then they made the movie. Isn't that weird? Watch it, it's really weird. It's called Sunspring, but it's a start. So this stuff's getting real very, very quickly. Okay? Now, it didn't come from nowhere, this AI stuff, so the first algorithm is Euclid. We have 2,500 years of this mathematics before we actually got to where we are now. It just hasn't sprung up on us over the last 5 years or so with Algorithmi, the great Arab scholar who gives us the word algorithm, the Latinate form of his name. And then we have a whole load of mathematicians and probability theories right through to Bayes, there's a whole area of AI on statistical probability based on his theorem. So loads of stuff has gone on here. It hasn't come from nowhere. Okay? But the real springboard for this actually took place in a place called Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. In the US, there was a guy called McCarthy. This was the modern age of AI when they started looking at AI and applying it to real-world problems, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And this is where I first got introduced to it. When I was 19, I went to this college in the States, and that's where I got introduced to this concept of AI, and it stuck with me all those years, and it's now having its renaissance. Okay, why now? Well, if you think of AI a bit like a rocket ship, so you've got all these algorithms, we are in the age of algorithms. A rocket ship is absolutely useless without fuel, and algorithms are absolutely useless without data. They have an input and they have an output. The input is the really interesting bit, okay? Now the input has suddenly become an enormous amount of fuel because it's fed by the World Wide Web. So when you use Google, Google is good because you use Google. The more you use Google, the better it gets. That's the principle of machine learning, deep learning. The more you do it, the better it gets. Remember that for learning theory in a moment, okay? Now, if you do want to go into the maths or the background stuff, there's quite a readable book here called The Master Algorithm. Just point you towards that. If you want to take a photograph of that later, it's right there. But AI is not one thing. There are many schools of thought here. There's evolutionary AI. There is semantic AI. It's hundreds of different things, major schools of thought, and lots of fragmented bits and pieces here. But it all comes down to one principle: smart maths, making decisions which human beings have been making in the past, doing what we have all been doing in the past. And I'm not frightened by that. I'm quite excited by that. Okay? And then, last technical slide at all here, machine learning, which is the whole notion that a piece of code writes its own code. So a piece of software not only learns, takes data, that's what supervised learning is, it takes loads of data, learns on its own, then writes new code, which allows it to become even more sophisticated, like from being a learner to becoming a teacher. And not only that, it teaches itself in super fast time. Unsupervised is more like Hume's induction. It's the notion that you don't feed it with lots of data, you just use reason and semantics and probability. And this one here, this is really fascinating, reinforcement theory. Dennis Hassabis was a games kid. He was a chess champion, a Go champion. He went into the games industry. Anybody who's worked in the games industry would know his name, very famous games designer. He went into academia for 2 years, wrote 2 seminal papers on how we learn through reinforcement, came out, started a company in London, and in 18 months sold it to Google for $500 million. And that company is nothing more than 1 page of A4 of algorithms. That's all it was. Why? Because he understands algorithms in relation to real learning tasks, real learning theory. And I think we have a marvelous opportunity here now to ditch the crap we've been dealing with in the past, all that learning style stuff, that Myers-Briggs nonsense, the Kirkpatrick stuff. Let's ditch all that bad learning theory, because these guys are showing us that good learning theory, which largely comes from cognitive science, it's about memory, it's about retention, it's about recall. These guys are actually doing it for real with bloody robots. And we're failing in classrooms with bowls of Fox's Glacier mints on tables. You know, what world do we think we're in? So you've got to listen to these guys because they're doing it for real, okay? Now, there's an interesting thing happened in the cars world. I don't drive a car. I've never driven a car in my life. Don't have a license. So I'm quite looking forward to getting a Tesla, which I can call up from the pub, and it will come and collect me, take me home. That's my ideal. That's utopia. But who saw that one coming? And interestingly, when I was looking at this whole notion of AI, I thought, here's a nice little lead here, because in the US, the Automobile Association there had a 5-level sort of taxonomy of the use of AI in cars. So initially with cars, then with power steering, some of the AI was embedded in the car itself, in your engine, dashboard data, and so on. Then cars became sort of semi-autopilot-ish. You can put them in cruise control on the motorway, and then out at the end comes autonomous cars. And believe me, Elon Musk in September will be launching a saloon car with full autopilot. In other words, it will drive itself. That's happening. That's here already. That is amazing, isn't it? And I think something like this will happen in learning. And I'm going to follow a sort of parallel path on this, okay? So the first one is tech. I think we've been there for a long time. AI is already embedded in tech and learning, and has been for a long time, nearly 20 years. So it's in Google. Google is nothing but AI. That's all it is, nothing else. So you've already been using AI for many, many years. Facebook, your whole newsline, all the ads, they're all driven by AI. Apple have absolutely jumped wholeheartedly onto the AI bandwagon. So Siri, Messenger, all the releases on the new iPhone and so on are all AI-driven. They've been buying companies like crazy. Interestingly, last year, bought an AI-driven learning company. Apple did. Amazon, all that recommendation stuff, you bought this book, would you like that book? All AI-driven. All of these companies are spending literally billions on AI companies because they think the whole of IT is going to be shaped by this. And this is a learning technologies conference, so if the technology bit is going to be driven by AI, we should be paying attention. Okay? So Google, let me focus on Google for a minute. So when Google hit the streets, it had one quite simple algorithm called PageRank, quite famous, and that was it. That's what drove Google. It was as simple as that. You tried, but the problem with that, it was too simple. So if you knew what the algorithm was, you could cheat it. So you have an army of SEO experts coming in and cheating it, trying to get your website up in the rankings. Don't pay for any of those people now, by the way, because the AI is so good in Google now with a thing called RankBrain, which is actually a whole rack of algorithmic techniques that it's almost impossible to cheat. So if you're paying for an SEO expert, ask them about RankBrain, because you can't cheat this thing. It's far too smart. Okay? Now, there are other things that have happened here that are interesting. It's not just Amazon. If you've been involved in online dating, then the top online dating companies are already using smart algorithms to try and match the data, the input, that's you, if you pay for their service, and the output, of course, which they want, is a long-term relationship. So, in that data set, what were the characteristics in matching? It's a bit like Google. What were the characteristics that led to long-term relationships, marriage, kids, whatever you want? Well, let's try and replicate them and predict that and try and get a partner that's suitable for you in that sense in terms of long-term success. Why wouldn't you want that? As opposed to the rather random process that I went through in pubs and nightclubs. It's totally random and a bit odd, really. Then we have LinkedIn. LinkedIn have just bought a big AI company called Bright, and they, of course, have just been bought by Microsoft. Microsoft themselves have invested huge sums of money in AI, so they're going in that direction. I mentioned Netflix, even sport. So Manchester City has 13 data analysts, 13 data analysts on their staff. Isn't that astounding? There's hardly a major sporting team in the world now that doesn't pay attention to this. This is interesting when you get AI embedded in tech. So I do a lot on VR as well. Virtual reality has been driven by AI. The whole notion of how you get rid of motion sickness, how that tracking your head against the model works, all AI driven, as is this. So you have Magic Leap, who have raised $750 million on a valuation of $4.5 billion, and they have no customers. No customers, and they're rated at $4.5 billion. Why? Because they have cracked the algorithmic system which feeds stuff and projects it straight into your retina and deals with a thing called depth of focus in the way that no other AR company has. okay? Now, an interesting thing here also is some of the things, there's one species of AI that I think will hit us already, and that's speech and face recognition. Now, speech recognition through Siri is already here. And in the States, there has been a huge rush on sales on Amazon Echo. So you have this little column in your kitchen or your living room, and you speak to it. And you can now, in the States, actually say, give me an Uber taxi, I want it to arrive by 9 o'clock, I want it to take me downtown, and it will order it, boom, that's it. It's frictionless e-commerce, that's what all this is about. Now, Mary Meeker, who gives a talk every year on the big shifts in the internet, this was her big one this year. This shift to voice, the idea that we'll be using voice as an interface, a sort of frictionless thing. And isn't that right? Isn't that what Socrates did? Isn't that what teachers did before we got blackboards and then they all turned their backs on audiences? Isn't that what good teaching is with kids? You speak to them. Voice is the primary thing in language, writing is secondary, and we're obsessed by text in training and education. Endless texts. You know, do you really want to learn Shakespeare by reading the text? Or do you want to go to the Globe and see Shakespeare? He never wrote it for books, he wrote it for the stage. We've become obsessed by text resources. So Amazon Echo is, I think, the first one here. That's built on an AI platform called Alexa. So even Amazon are betting the whole company on the basis of this back-end system here. We'll see that in the UK soon. The people who built Siri are going to give us Viv. Watch the YouTube video on this. It's astounding. You can ask it amazingly complicated questions as a doctor, for example, with amazingly confused logic, and it will give you the answer. Not only that, if you do want to order your pizza with pepperoni at under £10 to arrive at 6 o'clock, it will do that just by asking it, because they've got links with all the suppliers. This is becoming very good very quickly. Now, to relate it back to some learning stuff for a moment, this team, Chris Peach's team at Stanford, I really like because they tackled a big problem, which is, can AI do what a teacher does? And so they fed an AI engine with 1.4 million episodes of kids doing maths on Khan Academy. Okay, so that's your input, that's your data into the AI engine. The AI engine then trained itself to predict what a child would do next. And they're up to 0.85 or 85% probability. So I've taught maths before to kids. It is almost impossible to predict what's going on in the head of 30 kids. It is almost impossible. It's just too much. Even with one person, there's about 14, 15 things can go wrong when you just multiply one number by another. The interesting thing about the software is it can predict with 85% accuracy what the child is going to do in the next question. That is a huge insight for a teacher. So already, and it's getting better and better, we're getting AI engines that are doing better things than teachers. Okay? This is an interesting one with huge consequences for our world. In Japan, the Todai robot project is not a robot, by the way. It's a piece of software, a piece of AI software. They trained this thing up to pass a university exam. And this year, in December, it passed the university entrance exam for Tokyo University, a piece of AI. They just showed it the paper, literally on a camera. That's all they did. Semantic analysis of the text, a whole load of database work, a whole load of detailed calculations, and it was physics, maths, English, various subjects, and it outperformed the human beings in Japan that sat the same exam, okay? This is interesting. So, if a piece of AI is as good as the graduates going in at a university, why do we need graduates? Surely the piece of AI will be as good as graduates coming out. Why are we training lawyers, doctors, and all that stuff? Because the AI will do it better. And this is just the first bash, and it's already outperforming humans. The consequences for HR and L&D are enormous here. Absolutely huge. All that training we're doing, all that bullshit leadership training, is for naught. It's for naught. I actually think it's for naught for other reasons. Actually, I've got a book here, by the way, called Leadership is Bullshit by a serious academic from Stanford, which I highly recommend to you. I brought it along because it's the best thing I've read in the last year, but that was a tangent. Okay, this is what happened with this exam. First of all, it's not one bit of AI. Remember, AI is many things. It actually grabs the paper at the top. It does its semantic analysis. It formulates what it thinks the problems are, and then it goes into calculations and solutions. Super smart. Way, way smarter than the average Joe, and way, way smarter than smart people who already know a lot of maths. So we're really getting there now. Okay? Then we had Go. So remember the DeepMind story I told you? So that's one page of algorithms by this sort of geeky kid who's good at games, sold a company, $500 million, no customers then, and within 6 months to a year, it was beating the Go champion. And Go is a far more sophisticated game than chess, possibly the most sophisticated game we know. So, however, it did use a huge amount of processing power from Google Cloud. The way it did this, how did it beat Go? Well, you train the machine, remember that input, you train it with lots of human data from real Go players, then it starts to play itself. But it plays itself millions and millions of times, super fast. So it's like having a learner in your classroom, and you give it some basic theory, and then it just takes over. And then at the end of the class, before you've even breathed your next breath, it's better than you. That's what this stuff's doing. That's what happened here. You know, it absolutely hammered the Go champion. Okay? Now, there is a danger here that you may have spotted already. Well, what if Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon rule the world? And suddenly you get this, it was mentioned this morning, this oligarchy of IT companies who just keep all this AI stuff, and we have to go to them and beg for it if we want to use it. There is a great danger here in this. However, I think, by the way, this quote I've put up, because you will have seen this quote 1,000 times at conferences, it's absolute bullshit. Thomas Watson, the IBM CEO, never actually said that at all. By the way, almost every Einstein quote you see at these conferences is bullshit as well. Einstein never said half of that crap. Nevertheless, I like the quote because it does sort of predict, it does actually curiously predict what actually happened. There are about 5 companies that own everything you do online. Isn't that curious? However, I think what is actually happening, this is IBM's Watson. So I've been using Watson, but it's easy. You literally go online, you turn on the tap, and they will give you free service up to a certain level, and I've been using this in learning applications. So IBM don't want to be monopolistic. They want to create an ecosystem of companies that uses this stuff. So there are huge opportunities in the learning world for us to tap into artificial intelligence because it's like water. You can switch on the tap, and a lot of it's now free, and then beyond a certain level, it's quite cheap. So AI is cheaper than a lot of the crappy old authoring languages and stuff we see in e-learning. Isn't that a cool thing? Beyond this, we have Elon Musk, who has just started a new company called OpenAI. This is a not-for-profit company, and he hired the best researchers he could find on the planet, okay, paid them superstar salaries, almost NBA sort of basketball salaries, because he wants to publish this stuff and make it open source. So there's a backlash against the big companies, and this is useful. I'm really keeping an eye on that one, because there we have a chance of democratizing AI in a way that I would like to see by making it open source, okay? So it's embedded in the tech, that's a fact. You know, we saw this morning that curve where AI was halfway up the future thing. It's not, it's actually halfway up the already happened bit of the curve of AI. It's already been here for a long, long time. Let's have a look at assistive AI, where AI helps a learner. Now this is the thing called PhotoMaths. It's an app. Teachers absolutely hate it with a vengeance. Spit blood when they hear about it. Kids absolutely love it. Why? Because you put your phone above your math problem, it can be even handwritten, and it gives you the answer. How cool is that? That's exactly what I wanted when I was a kid, so I can get out and do something else. So to get away from the maths Taliban for a moment, the idea that you should teach people maths endlessly all day, every day, until people are sort of dead with maths, I think what we have here, interestingly though, is it does something quite interesting from a teacher's point of view. It not only gives you the answer, it gives you all the steps in between the question and the answer, and that's what teaching maths is about, actually. It's also what learners want. When you're stuck at home with those horrible set exercises that maths teachers really love, you know, 16 questions all the same on a one thing, the chore that is maths homework, and you get stuck, what did I do? I just got stuck. What do smart kids now? They type the teacher's question into Google, because teachers are lazy and don't write their own questions, and they get the answer. They'll be doing that anyway. Now, however, the kid can actually get all the breakdown and actually do some real learning and homework as opposed to just get stuck and get red pen, could do better. And then we have Duolingo in language learning. This is, if you want to see real AI in action, behind Duolingo is a quite smart space practice engine. Remember, all the space practice engines work on an algorithmic basis. It's a bit of smart maths. We have 23 languages, another 23 courses coming along, 120 million people, and it's got a value of $500 million, and it's free. It's a not-for-profit, it's free, folks. The biggest language learning platform on the planet, came from nowhere, and it's free. That's what AI can give you. It gives you scalability of sophisticated teaching. Okay? Another interesting thing that's starting to happen, so if you speak to some really young people, I mean, you're below 16, they'll know all about chatbots, because chatbots are big in their world. So we have Cortana. The things for adults are really Cortana, which you may know if you're in the Android world. Siri, of course, which has just had this huge boost yesterday. Siri is the future for Apple. Viv's coming on its wake. This is Little Ice, Xiaoqi in Chinese. Huge number of Chinese kids. It's just an AI bot, but people think it's something. It's sort of weird. They think it's real. And that's because the more kids that use it, the better it gets and the realer it sounds. So bots are like that. They're like human beings. Some would argue, there's some philosophers who are saying, well, hang on a minute, this might be real. This thing actually, because it has trained itself up, might have almost an element of intelligence and consciousness that we're missing here. And I have some sympathies with that view. Then we have Tay, the famous Microsoft bot that got launched recently. And of course, kids are smart, and they started to train it, so it became a sort of sex-crazed Nazi bot on the web. I mean, you should read some of the stuff. It is absolutely horrific. However, there's something quite, I really like this, because kids understand what AI is, and they know that it's trainable, so they went on and trained it to be a sex-obsessed Nazi. I think that's quite smart. It shows how smart our kids are. And yet, of course, all the right-wing press, oh, isn't it terrible, the future is, all that sort of dystopian stuff. It just shows that we're moving forward, in my view, to be honest. Other things here, we have Facebook. So Facebook Messenger is all going to be AI-driven here. You'll see them follow Siri. Amazon's Alexa, even Google themselves are basing a lot of their services, other services other than search on AI. So it's all starting to happen. This is all chatbots. In other words, you go on and it seems like a human being on the web. Now that would be good for online learning. If it really did seem like a good teacher, that's a breakthrough for me. And this actually happened. So at Georgia Tech, so my son is doing a degree in AI, and he sent me the email on this the day after it happened. These 300 kids are quite smart kids, good at maths, they know about AI, and the professor decided to do something quite smart. They have 9 teaching assistants that help the kids with their assignments. He swapped one of the teaching assistants out for a bot, a piece of AI. Didn't tell them. They called it Jill Watson. You think they would know the word Watson in it. Georgia Tech, it only replied to students if it had a very high probability of getting the question right. And okay, so it was good, this thing. It wasn't a Mickey Mouse piece of AI. Every single one of the 300 students were fooled by it. In fact, one put it forward for a teaching award. This is crazy. Okay, you know what gave the game away? A number of the kids, they're smart. They said, every time I ask this thing a question, it comes back really quickly. Like normally in a university, can you remember submitting an essay? How long did it take you to get an essay back? Was it days or perhaps weeks? That's bullshit. Here, the only reason the kids cottoned onto it was the fact that it came back in a millisecond, and no human being could do that. No human being could be that quick. So this stuff's starting to happen here. I think we have the opportunity of scaling up online education, initially with some assistive. It's not replacing teachers wholly, it's technology-enhanced teaching, by taking some of the spade work out of teaching. Actually, for a lot of chat stuff, online stuff, when you run courses and MOOCs, a lot of it's administrative stuff that teachers hate doing. When are the assignments going, and when are you going to get back? You know, all that sort of stuff. Just hand that over to the bots and get on with your real teaching. That's the big breakthrough here. Okay, so online assessment. Here's one. I have yet to meet a teacher or a trainer who really likes marking, but there seems to be a sort of process of self-flagellation here, because every academic I've ever known hates marking, but they don't want to do any automatic assessment. Oh no, that would be too much. Are you mad? I mean, this is a sort of masochistic sort of trade you're in. The bottom line is that AI is now you're now doing the digital ID, so we have real-time face recognition. If you do online exams, it can look at my face, it knows I'm Donald, it can do the digital ID, and then it's real-time face recognition. It can even tell if I'm cheating by glancing. You know, maybe I've got my brother who's doing the sort of Bob Dylan with the cards behind the computer while I'm doing the answers. The typing test that Coursera do is an AI-driven algorithm to make sure that your unique fingerprint is in the assignment, so you're typing through the keyboard. So all sorts of things are already happening there. And then a big one is the automated essay marking. You might think that's a challenge. So here's the, if only I had a few more papers to grade, said no teacher ever, big meme on Facebook. So what we're going to do about that? Well, automate the marking. Automate the marking. So we now have, from edX, MIT and Harvard, you now have a piece of software, AI-driven software, you feed it with 100 essays marked by real experts, domain experts, you feed it with data, input, 100 essays, and it becomes as good as those academics at marking future essays. Why? Because it has a good rubric. Grammarly is very similar. It can spot all the grammatic errors. There are all sorts of interesting things. Now, this is a real breakthrough because I, as a student now, don't submit an essay, wait 4 weeks with B minus, could do better, needs more detail, that crap. I can actually submit an essay to this and as a first draft, and it will give me some interesting feedback. Then I'll write another draft, more interesting feedback. That's how people learn to write. Academics have got this all wrong. You know, I did a degree in philosophy. You know what I did in my finals? I memorized 10 essays. I literally memorized them. I regurgitated them in the exam. That's what every student on the planet is doing today. That's what you do with essays. Nothing to do with writing in real time. Smart students memorize essays. That's how you get a first or a 2-1. It's a complete myth that we're teaching critical skills in writing in our universities. We're teaching the opposite. We're teaching memorization. Okay, how about creating online learning? So I spent 30-odd years in companies that built online learning. Could AI create online learning? All that hassle with subject matter experts, £20,000 an hour, 6 months to create online learning content? Well, this is something I set as a goal for myself because one of Roger Shank's students, I don't know if you know Roger, went off and built a company that got a piece of AI software that wrote baseball reports, and he syndicated it all over the US and made a pile of money. And it was a piece of software that wrote sports reports. And the human beings didn't know it was a piece of software. In fact, when they did a comparison with real journalists, they preferred the AI report because the AI knew the weather, knew all the stats of the sports people, give you a much more accurate picture of the game. That's interesting. And it spurred something in my own mind, which is, suppose we do that for learning. Suppose I have an engine that actually creates good learning content, okay? And I said, right, this time I'm not going to make the mistake of basing it on sort of fatuous learning theory, and I went back to some good stuff. And if you're interested, this book, Make It Stick, highly recommend it. It basically summarizes the last 10 to 12 years of solid cognitive science on how we learn. And I based this whole enterprise on that book. It's a readable book, and I highly recommend it. But it's got lots of counterintuitive things in it. Basically, it says multiple choice questions are a complete waste of time. It's recognition from a list. So no expert ever, no doctor, no nurse, no engineer has ever gone into a problem and went, is that your lungs, your brain, or your liver? It's just stupid. All you're doing is lazy learning. It's the illusion of mastery. What you need to do is force recall, get people to really work and recall things from their brains. That's how people learn. Open response inputs, not multiple choice, personalizing the learning, delaying feedback, interestingly. Don't give them feedback immediately, wait till the end. That's a really interesting and counterintuitive thing. All sorts of in space practice, of course, that we've known about for some time. Then I was chairing Jimmy Wales here in London. I asked him, I said, and my initial target was Wikipedia. Supposing we have a version of Wikipedia that was AI-driven, it grabs a Wikipedia page and it creates a piece of online learning. And he thought that was a really cool idea, but didn't have any money. 20 people and all that donation stuff, so I went off and had a look at this problem myself. And got some money, created a thing called Wildfire that takes any document, PowerPoint, podcast, or video, any of those things, you feed it into this AI engine, okay? A little semantic engine at the bottom here looks at that piece of text and goes, what's the most interesting learning points there? If you're a nurse, you really need to know about dosages. Well, that number's going to be important. You really need to know this, that, and this if it's a procedure. So this here is just a screenshot from the mobile version. So this is a 2.5-minute video of a nurse, okay? You watch the video, and it's about allergy testing on the skin. So you drop the allergens on the skin, you prick the skin with a little lancet so it goes into the blood, and you see if it bubbles up or not. An allergy test. There's about 6 things you need to know there. But when you first meet the patient, there's 2 things you really need to know. You need to make sure they've not got any dermatitis or eczema on their skin. And this question here, have you had any antihistamines in the last 4 days? Antihistamines blow the test away. You really have to know those things, okay? When we tested nurses with a video, curiously, they never got this answer to this question right because they knew the words, but not the numbers. Video is very poor at numerical information, okay? So what we do is, that video is on YouTube. I grab the transcript of the video because YouTube produces a transcript automatically now. Every YouTube video has a transcript. I grab it, it automatically goes into an AI engine, and it produces e-learning. 1 click of the button, minutes, not months, okay? Not only that, if you're typing in negative control, so the first prick on the top of the arm here is a negative control. Now, some nurses might not know a lot about the scientific method and the fact that the control what is a control in the scientific method. So the engine, remember no design here, no human agency, automatically produces a little link at the bottom here, scientific control to Wikipedia. Okay, so one of the ways the artificial intelligence engine knows what the learning points are is it goes to Wikipedia and goes, is there an article on that topic? Then it has a sort of sense check. Well, if somebody's written a full article, it must be a fairly important thing for the learner to learn, in addition to the maths behind the algorithms. So, nurse gets it wrong. It gets typed up in red here. You can click on that, and off it goes to Wikipedia, and we'll give you text on the scientific control around Wikipedia. Not only that, if I'd opened Wikipedia up, you can do that in a variable in the software, it will test you and create e-learning on the Wikipedia content automatically. So your course is like porous around the edge. Get the idea? You've not only got a bit of e-learning that's produced automatically, one click, you've got porosity around the edge so the learner can get an expansive, personalized view of other content or other things they may have not known in this stuff. And you can do all this stuff using this type of tool. This is IBM Watson's tool, which is online. Not only that, I hate gamification by and large if it's rubies and Pac-Man scores and all that frivolous stuff. You know, I'm 59 years old. I don't want to be collecting silver coins in any e-learning program. Sorry, folks, I find it condescending. However, there's good stuff in gamification, which is linking people back through the content until they get it right. 100% competence. This matters for nurses because if you get 80%, the other 20% will kill somebody. So this 80% threshold thing has always been stupid. So it'll loop you back and all that jazz, okay? And then it'll give you a summary at the end of the thing. Not only that, it will then give you space practice. And we know all about space practice surely by now. Ebbinghaus, 1885. You've forgotten almost everything I've told you today. That's science. The way you remember it is take notes, look at the Twitter feed or whatever. You have to reinforce the learning to remember this stuff. And so what's the promise of AI in e-learning production? Well, I think you can have a massive increase in quality, meaning retention and recall. I think you can have a dramatic reduction in cost to 10 to 20% of the existing costs. And I think the time comes down from months to minutes. That's how powerful these breakthroughs can be. And we've been doing this with real companies in the real world, okay? Now, let's move on to another form of AI here, which is called adaptive or analytic learning. This is an interesting one. You could say that the data you need about a learner at the beginning about learning styles could be useful, but it wouldn't be because they're bullshit and they don't exist. You could say, well, let's grab some Myers-Briggs stuff. You could, but that's a Ponzi scheme. It's a waste of time. It does you no good at all if you actually put it into your system. You could say big data. That's a waste of time as well because there is no big data in our world. It's tiny little bits of data. You know, it's like no data at all. At this conference, you might get some happy sheet data. You know, people are still, like L&D is still at the level of taking little things ticked in pencils and putting them into spreadsheets. And you call that data? Go to a data scientist and they sort of giggle and walk out the room. So I don't think we're anywhere on the map on big data, and I don't think it's the real point because there are companies. I really recommend you go and see this company called Filtered. Is Mark in the room from Filtered at all? No. Anyway, the guy who runs this is really interesting. There are a lot of AI guys who have built this thing, and sorry, I said guys there. Actually, the head programmer is a woman, in fact. They have a look at the learner before they start a course, gather interesting, small bits of data, but useful data about what they need to learn. They then move on to gather aggregated data about what all other learners have done in that course on Excel and so on, and use that to present the course. And they give you a dashboard which is constantly dynamic. So if you're really good at Excel, you'll shoot through the course really quickly. If you're really crap at it, it'll take longer time. That's what learning should be. That's not what we deliver by and large, even in e-learning. Okay, so that's an interesting example. The hybrid one is interesting. Now here we have adaptive learning, a bit like a sat-nav. So imagine having a sat-nav as a learner. So when you go off-piste in your car, the sat-nav actually uses AI to get you back on course again. That's what you want for learners. If we go off-piste, we want to get back onto the mainstream course in maths or whatever subject it is. Okay, so there's loads of stuff happening in AI on this front. This company I've invested in twice because I think it does work and will work. So rather than having a course, you have a network of learning objects, and every learner vectors through that content differently, depending on the little bits of data you're gathering about their performance. So you got University of Edinburgh, huge courses in the SU, Biology 101 courses. What does the data say? Top left, students love it. They want it in their other courses. Attainment goes up, and it's because it's highly correlated. Dropout goes down. This is working, folks. Let me show you a real example. Is Andy Wooler here today at all? I don't know if he's maybe in the audience. Well, Andy, if you want to speak about somebody who's really doing adaptive learning for real in the company, look at Hitachi, 100,000 people, machine learning. Here, it's not the size of your source, but the size of the insights that really matter. It's not about big data. It's about insights in your business, and that's what the alignment is. And Andy's doing exactly the same thing using a thing called Area 9. Okay, and you're doing all sorts of interesting things about your confidence around answers and so on. Really smart system, and it's all competence-based. He has a vision, which is absolutely amazing, of having no courses. All you have is like a big playlist, like an Apple playlist of music, and you vector through competencies. No courses at all, because in the real world, that's what real learning is like. It's not course structured. He's using API for that as well. They're also using this with anger in the American National Safety Council. Some real corporate examples of this stuff, okay? This, I think, is the best piece of e-learning I've seen in the last 5 years by a company called Caspian in Newcastle. It's called Human Performance Intelligence. Here's a bank, got fined $1 billion. $1 billion, okay? Compliance training didn't work. We know that compliance training doesn't work. What happened in 2008? Didn't we get the message, folks? All that shitty training we've been delivering for decades didn't work. It made it worse. Did they behave any differently afterwards? No, they didn't, because your compliance training has no effect on these people whatsoever. However, they're getting fined now, quite rightly, so what do they do about this? Well, what Caspian did was got out of the training, the existing paradigm. They built some simulations, real performance sims, all over the world they delivered this. And then they put it into an AI engine, which delivered insights to the senior management. So the training course becomes like a living experiment in the organization, okay, that feeds insights to really senior managers who then do something about it, because there's no way they can do that by warm bodies on the ground. Okay, and sure enough, the sort of problems that they were finding were these little red things, the red risk operations, and the key traits which they were looking for in big problems were that they were being risk averse. Everybody was telling them that these people were taking too many risks. The very opposite was true, because the maths doesn't lie. Okay, so I think we're seeing this sort of stuff start to happen here. Real risk, management of risk in big organizations through training as a sort of experiment. Okay, and then the last one, space practice. Loads of companies around. I've been involved in building a thing called Encore. If you want to see that, that's out on the floor in Learning Pool. But plenty of tools. Anki's actually open source and free. Space practice, guys, the biggest principle. We know with absolute certainty that it works, and none of us use it. Why are you not using it? It will give you 200% increase in recall and retention, and we do nothing about it. Why are we doing nothing about it? One of my biggest disappointments is that I've been rattling on about this for 20 years, and people still will not waken up to Ebbinghouse's basic fact, 1885. You will forget everything I have just said to you. You have to repeat things, not repeat them, but repeat them with deliberate intention so that you raise your skills. Okay? We know this stuff is true. We've got to start using it. And the only way you can do space practice cleverly is by using algorithms. So you take maybe what you know, what you half know, what you don't know. You have to reinforce everything, even the things you think you know, because they will fade from memory, and you interleave them cleverly and mathematically so that you optimize the space practice experience for every learner, because every learner is different. So, for example, in Duolingo, if you go to Greece to the beach for a week and miss your German course, and you come back and go, Christ, you know, all that German to do again, I've forgotten a lot of it. Duolingo does something quite clever. It takes your stuff and spreads it like jam across future events. It does that through software. That's clever. That's a clever approach to space practice, rather than giving you a huge dollop and demotivating you. Okay? And of course, you're getting this thing on mobiles. This is where mobiles really come into their own. I just don't buy this delivering e-learning courses on mobile stuff. I don't drive. I've been in trains thousands of times between Brighton and London. I have never, ever seen anybody do an e-learning course on their mobile. Never, ever. And I never will. It's a complete false god. Space practice is what you should be delivering on that stuff. Now I'll end on this last one. What we have in cars, as I said earlier, let's recap that one. We had some interesting data. Cars actually had more data about them than we have of our own bodies until Fitbit came along. I know nothing about what's going on inside my body. My wife has a car. I can go into the dashboard and it knows more about its own body than I know about mine. And then Fitbit comes along. Suddenly you get real data about your own body. But then cars started to produce interesting data, really sophisticated stuff. Then sat-navs came along. AI used to guide you, assistive technology. Then we have the automatic car. This is the new Tesla, the Tesla X that will be coming out, and this will be fully automatic in September. Who are the companies behind this? Google, Tesla, Uber. They don't even own any drivers or cars. All they do is own smart software and increasingly AI. And of course, Apple will make announcements on this front as well. Because this is really super smart. And this is what I hope will happen in the future, that the car is like a learner, you know? It's constantly trying to predict what I need next. It's looking at backward-looking data. A smart car is already smarter than any driver because it's got radar and it's looking behind you. You can't look behind you and look ahead. Even in that simple principle, it's already better. It will be clearly safer and better. And this autonomous learning, I think, will come to us. I think there will be a Netflix or a Google or an Apple who will bring scalable AI to learning and wipe the competition off the board. Okay? Because algorithms do things that teachers can't. They don't know I'm an old Scottish guy. They don't know my gender, they don't know my race, my sexual proclivity, they don't know my social background. That's a good thing for me. I like that idea. They're free from cognitive bias. We all have cognitive biases. We're all racist, sexist to a degree, never get tired, ill, or hangovers. And they personalize things, but this is the big one, they scale. So why are these big tech companies buying this? Scale, scale. That's what we need in education and training. And here's the bad news, folk. We are here, we're coming through here. Computer performance is outdoing human performance. We know with a fair degree of certainty that huge swathes of jobs will disappear, mostly lawyers and accountants. I'm not actually crying in my soup over those two, I have to say. But there are many other jobs as well. And think about teaching and training for a minute. The idea that we're not immune from that. Remember, the e-learning industry has already eaten into the number of trainers that used to exist. I can remember the time when we had big stately homes in the middle of nowhere and people used to go on induction courses for 6 months. You know, all that bullshit's gone. It's a much sharper industry now. And if you're interested in 2 books, they're up there on the future of the professions. This may seem a bit depressing, but it's something we have to cope with as HR and L&D professionals. If what I've said is correct, and I think it is because it's already happening, then this is the future you face. Training people to do things that they won't have to do. You know, I already think we do a lot of that anyway. You know, I absolutely abhor the leadership training industry. I think it's another Ponzi scheme. You know, you read some crappy book on leadership a few days before, you never led anything other than a workshop, and we think that's what we should be doing in organizations. And you know, we talked about hierarchy this morning. Nothing worse than leadership training for reinforcing hierarchy. Think of that word, leader. Have you ever walked into an organization and said to the receptionist, could you take me to your leader? Are you fucking mad? Have you been in the pub with a senior manager and you say, what do you do for a living? You say, well, I'm a leader, actually. Go, right? Well, I don't want to know you. Oh, so what are we peddling here? What are we peddling? Some sort of 19th century hierarchical, oligarchical theory? Dressed up as be nice to people, be authentic, be whatever you want, some general abstract nouns. Throw them up, you know, usually beginning with C, be collective, be this, be that. I think we really have to waken up and listen to what these guys are doing and allow the technology to embed, gather brilliant learning theory and deliver what we as human beings and teachers are incapable of doing. Then we really become those sort of facilitators of the technology and use it to best advantage. I'm sorry if I've ended on a note that was a little bit pessimistic there, but I think it's a real thing that we as an industry should be waking up to. I've written loads on this, by the way, so if you want to look at any of this stuff, have a look on my website. I've clustered all these AI articles together on that one, Plan B Learning. I've got a blog. I'm constantly writing about this stuff. If you want to contact me, there's my email address. And if you want to look at the books that I think are really readable, you know, they're not sort of esoteric, these books, then these books here, come and take a picture of them. It saves me having to email the Amazon link to you. But thanks very much for listening. I hope I haven't pissed you off too much, but we do have some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running a little tight for going to lunch, but some of you, thank you very much. You've embraced the technology and you've sent your questions in by Twitter. I think what I might do, given time constraints, is suggest that I'll pass those questions on to Donald virtually. And
let's have one question anyway, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you what, the person who asks the first question gets the brain.
Is there one in the room? Is there a question in the room?
Who wants a brain?
There's one up at the back. There you go. Gentleman there. We got...
I'll try shouting.
Yeah, sure, fine. No problem. I can hear you.
In the chat on the AI that you had,
yeah?
You talked about the number of transactions, so 1.4 million or 30 million points of gathering data. In the learning area in which I operate, we don't have that. We're talking about maybe 70,000 learners doing different things. How can we use AI when we're working in that smaller environment?
Okay, well, in adaptive learning, so if you take the Cogbooks example there, they're in the same boat as you. You know, you're doing a higher education course, you've got 300-400 students, sometimes a couple of thousand actually in big American universities. What you do is start gathering the data. So you start with an empty vessel, and as soon as the student starts doing things, you really pay attention. And they really gather a lot. It's small data really, but it's interesting data. So how long did the student spend just looking at the question? Does that mean that the question was badly written, or they don't know the answer to the question? These are the sort of things that the artificial intelligence engines are constantly asking and quizzing. The student then does some lightweight assessment. By then, you're starting to gather data about what they know, don't know, half know. And as you move through the course, if they really slow down, you bring them back a little bit, and you move them up another route. So just like your sat-nav, you know, that was a really good analogy there. It does that, but it's on relatively small amounts of data. You can make big inferences in learning quite quickly if you have good regular testing. I don't mean, you know, light touch testing throughout your course. This is why interactive e-learning, as we've known it, will actually work if we get the testing regime right. Now, that's why I've gone for open response questions, because when people are sitting there and they have to actually type septicemia in, that's a tough thing to know that it is septicemia, or that it's a viral or a bacterial. You really have to know whether it's viral or bacterial or not. You can't wing it. But if you have open response type questions, you're testing what they know in their brain or not. So these engines not only gather that, but even with a number of 70,000, that's plenty of data on the aggregated basis. So if you're running a compliance course on money laundering, after 5 years, that data builds and builds and builds, and every single person that took that course, you can gather that data and make inferences to help the next student. That's how machine learning works. So don't be frightened by the big data thing. It's just that they actually had that data. This is why I think in AI, it will be a big company that comes along and really rocks this market, like a Netflix of learning or something, you know, or an Amazon of learning, because they will have the capability of gathering these huge data sets and making their AI that little bit smarter. But there's loads of other niches for AI for us to operate in anyway. So don't be put off with the idea that you need loads of data. Actually, you need relatively small amounts of data to make really good things, good decisions on AI. And here's the brain. Don't know if I can throw it that far back. Hey, I overshot. Thanks for the question.
I will take one question, because somebody, they got their question in early on Twitter, so I think it's only fair to give them the first crack at the whip. And it's from Ben Hammersley. No, it's not. It's from Mike Dawkins. Oh. And he says, Ben Hammersley talks about meat puppets, people in jobs that will become AI. What's your view?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, the Industrial Revolution came along, and most of the people in agriculture lost their jobs because we mechanized agriculture. And then in the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing, lots of working class people lost their jobs, including my father-in-law, who was a miner. You know, we weren't shedding a lot of tears about that. But when suddenly it hits the middle classes, you know, it's a different game, isn't it? Suddenly AI is the dystopian future. It's okay to shed those jobs. So it's already happened in a sense. Manufacturing, for example, if you look at China, you're having massive, you know, you're literally getting 30,000 people being put out of a job by automation through robots, which is basically AI. Now, this is going to continue, and you just have to accept the fact that it will continue, but it will also create new jobs. But the net result will be fewer jobs. Of that, I am certain. This then goes into politics. I don't really want to get into a huge amount of political thing, but I think Western democracies do have to start looking at basic guaranteed incomes for people. I think we've got to get out of this trap of treating poor people as cheating scroungers all the time. You know, we have to be realistic. My father-in-law was a miner who was made redundant in '78. He was not a cheat. He was a great guy. And it's absolutely wrong to punish people just because they're unemployed or were made unemployed because of technology. The solution to that is political, and the solution to that is a basic guaranteed income, which Switzerland looked at and some Scandinavian countries are looking at. I think that's inevitable. It will happen. However, we have to, you know, deal with this issue with some compassion and some political sense. rather than, we already have structural unemployment and a benefit system that does this. We just put the big label, they're feckless people, on the top of it, and it's just not fair. And it's just not true. So the sooner we get out of that one, the better. I fear, however, having lived in England for 33 years, that you live in a country that prefers like little tea parties to celebrate the Queen's 90th birthday or something, rather than real politics. I honestly think we live in a country that's almost become unreformable. You know, we like this subjugation. You know, hey, 3 cheers for the Queen. Jesus, what land are we living in? You know, look at the problems that we're facing here. We're having tea parties. So I think, you know, in a sense, I don't see much political change. I'm sorry to be pessimistic there, but I think the Tory government will be in at the next election because people vote for it. People with money, the middle-class people, who come out in big numbers to vote, will crush those people who lose their jobs. When it happens to them, then the finger can be pointed. What did you do? What did you do in the last 3 elections? You know, did you actually vote for some sensible, rational future? Or did you vote for every man and woman for himself? Sorry, I'm getting very political now. I better end it there, or I'll be getting tomatoes or something. You get my drift.
I said in my introduction, always controversial, never afraid to speak his mind. That mind may become an AI in due course, if it hasn't already gone there. You see what I did there? That's us time up. Thank you for your time and attention. Those of you that tweeted your questions, Donald, if it's okay with you, I'll recirculate those and we can tweet those responses back out.
Yeah, I'll hang around here for a bit as well.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. Good for thought. Thank you, Donald Clark.